of all the educationals that I give, this one is my absolute favorite. So if you're an area director, I would suggest that you master this educational and you give it at every club that you go to, because I think you can create some pretty extraordinary change. I think I really wrote it for new members for the most part, or members who are trying to get back into speech writing and, have reached a bit of a plateau. The secret to the whole thing is that it's actually quite a simple process, and hopefully a lot more enjoyable if you're struggling in any single way. So here we go. The goal of the webinar is to help, if anybody's out there struggling, I want to show you a way that you'll actually hopefully enjoy your speech writing. And it was one of the great surprises for me in Toastmasters was that I didn't really anticipate the writing part of it, but once I started doing it, I absolutely loved it. Like going back into my life experiences and then trying to make a speech out of it. Like I said, this is all about simplifying. The first person I heard give this same presentation, although a different version of it, was Craig Sr. And he did such a spectacular job of showing how to simplify things. It completely changed the way that I started to write speeches. So let's start with these 4 essentials. You'll be reminded of these as we go through. The first one is, I've met a lot of people who just struggle with coming up with speech topics. So we definitely have to address that. And I think there's some fabulous opportunities for tapping into your deepest interests and then starting to create speeches around it. We'll also show you how to clarify your ideas before you start to write, which is an essential practice. I'll show you the simple speech structure that I was talking about that Craig showed me at one point. The big takeaway is that the order that you write in also makes all the difference. Okay, so generating ideas. Again, for people who are struggling with topics, I'm not exactly sure why people struggle so much, but I think that especially for new Toastmasters, sticking to the simple everyday topics are a great place to start. A lot of people try to get into the more complex topics right off the bat, and it really isn't a good way to start learning your speaking skills or developing speaking skills. So I'll emphasize the power of the simple everyday. And the next thing that is a wonderful opportunity is to be able to dive back into your deepest interests and start to learn about them. Here, let me give you a couple of examples. I don't know how many speeches I've written about family, but I would say over the years, probably about a dozen of them. This is my grandmother here, who is an incredible personality and someone obviously that I dearly loved and knew quite a bit about. So writing speeches about her was a really interesting and fascinating thing to do. Plus, I enjoyed going back in to the stories surrounding her life and having a bit of fun writing speeches around them. The next thing is, I studied fine arts, and I absolutely love Vincent van Gogh. So I'm taking the opportunity to spend my speech writing time writing about this fascination of mine, and then trying to deliver a great and impactful speech on that topic. So I'm learning a lot at the same time as I'm writing my speeches, and I'm learning about things that are really fascinate me. The next thing is, of course, travels. So if you're struggling for speech writing ideas, I think travels are a spectacular thing to write about because they're great for rich sensory descriptions, and people are always fascinated when you can bring somewhere else in the world into a Toastmasters meeting. So it's a pretty good idea. And the last example that I have here is just a garden. One of the best speeches I have ever heard was someone giving a speech about their garden. It was absolutely amazing. They obviously loved gardening, and they expressed that passion in the middle of the presentation, and or through the presentation rather. She took us through the different steps and stages of our gardens, and anyway, it was an incredible speech, but quite a simple topic. So don't underestimate the power of that simple topic in learning how to connect with an audience. The next essential that you need to take away is that it's very important to clarify your ideas before you start writing. And in order to clarify your ideas, the most important thing in a lot of ways is to get away from the computer and to devote time and quiet to diving into whatever that speech topic is. And the key to doing this, obviously, is to find a place where you can think in an uninterrupted way, and to turn off the phone or get away from the computer, get away from the TV and distractions, and just spend a solid, 30 minutes or 40 minutes just thinking about your speech idea. So my wife would be horrified, but when I'm washing dishes and thinking about speeches, for me, it's kind of an optimal pairing. We get a lot of dishes washed, but I get a lot of good quality speech writing time out of it as well. Typically what I do is I'm starting to write down outlines. As you can see in the background, there's my table. And as I'm thinking, I'm walking around, I'm washing dishes. And for whatever reason, this works for me. And so what I would urge you to do is find the thing that works for you, where you can clear your mind and just start focusing on a speech idea. Maybe it could be walking the dog, or maybe just outside walking, but whatever gets your mind focused on that speech topic, find it and pursue it. And the next aspect is keeping the speech structure very simple. So the first step is to clarify that speech idea. It's amazing how many people sit down and write a speech without actually clarifying the idea first. And when you do that, you end up going all over the place. And then it becomes a frustrating process. And for the most part, you realize that you didn't clarify to begin with. And one way to clarify, and one important other aspect of it, is to define what you want the audience to take out of the room. Most of the speeches that I hear, the speaker has not done that. But this is an incredible way to make sure that all of the information fits into that need. And of course, learning how to brainstorm your best supporting ideas in as simple a possible way. So let me show you the form that I use. You can write down this form any way you want. You certainly wouldn't have to use a formal one. But basically, you clarify the speech idea, you clarify the audience takeaway, and then you just start brainstorming supporting points. And you can write down 10 points. You can write down 20 points. It really doesn't matter at this point. But this is just a way to start getting an understanding of how the idea flow will work, what the big ideas are, and how they support that audience takeaway, and how they support that speech idea. Ultimately, when you're doing a 5 to 7 minute speech, you're only going to stick with 3 supporting points. But if you go through the exercise and write down several of them, then you can prioritize and go, okay, these are the 3 that are going to work the best for what I'm hoping to do. So I'll show you an example. This is when I was helping a speaker who really wanted to talk about the environment. My first comment to her was, well, the environment's a pretty big topic. So what exactly do you want the audience to do with your information? It took a little while, but she came up with, she wanted people to leave the meeting, or finish the speech knowing that they could go out and somehow make a difference. And once she had focused it to that point, it started to become easier to come up with supporting points. So now this was all about how people can make a difference in helping the environment. And she came up with, at the time, I don't know, like 5 or 6 different ideas. And then she focused on these 3, cutting your plastic usage drastically, limiting hot water usage, and the way you buy your produce or buying it locally. The reason that she chose these 3 supporting points is that she knew that everybody in the audience could relate to it and do something about it. So now she went from talking about the environment, this huge topic, to a very focused speech on how people can make a difference. So this is, for me, a classic and easy speech outline. And it's a great challenge to just get good at writing these speech outlines. Any topic that comes up, just try to throw it into a speech, figure out what an audience takeaway might be, and then supporting points. And by the way, this is an outstanding way to create table topics in a very quick period of time. Now, once you've finished writing the outline, what I like to do is then to put it all away and not write anything. If you have the time, then take a week to just think about that outline. So you've penciled in the outline, you have your big ideas, you know what the audience takeaway is, and now just start percolating on it. Meaning take a big step back, And through the week, what you'll realize is that you'll start to think about different aspects of it and maybe how you could improve your approach, or maybe come up with a different supporting point that's spectacular and helpful. And typically, like I said, this happens to me when I'm washing dishes or out for a walk or driving to work. You never know when those thoughts are going to pop into your head. But if you give yourself a little bit of time, or maybe you only have a day or two, give it a day or two and let the thoughts just percolate around your speech outline. The last and the biggest takeaway in lots of ways is that the order that you write it all in makes a huge difference. So this was from page 14 of the old Competent Communicator Manual. Everybody who writes a speech needs to understand this structure. So the structure is the classic opening, body, conclusion. And the body is broken down into basically the supporting points that I was talking about. Every single speech in the world pretty much fits this mold. And once you start understanding this structure, it's a lot easier to write. And so I broke it down this way. Once you've written down all of your supporting points and you're clear on your speech idea and you're clear on your takeaway, then you can start writing in the details. But it has to be done in a certain order. That's what those numbers are on the left-hand side. So I'll give you a tour of the order. The first is, as I said, clarify the speech idea, clarify the audience takeaway, and every single point that you write afterwards has to fit that notion. Next thing is, of course, the supporting points, which you've taken from your brainstorming session. And third is to write the details of those supporting points. So the thing that becomes obvious at this point is that we're writing the body of the speech before we're writing the introduction and conclusion. Most people who frustrate themselves write their speech in a linear way. They start with the introduction, they type the whole thing out, there's all kinds of brilliant ideas in it, and then they spend the whole rest of their writing time trying to make sure that all of their supporting points fit that introduction. So it's completely the backwards way to do it. What you want to do is really solidify those body points or those supporting points, and then you know exactly what you're going to introduce and conclude. Start from the middle, basically, and work to the outside. So next, of course, are the introduction and concluding points. When you start to fine-tune your writing skills, you can actually write your introduction and conclusion at the same time. You figure out relevant points to launch your speech into those supporting points, and then how you want to conclude based on the introduction. I'll show you a quick example. And of course, the title is last. If you come up with an ingenious title and then you start writing everything around it, that'll take forever. The essential takeaway from there is clarify the idea and the takeaway first, then write the supporting points, brainstorm the supporting points, followed by the details of the supporting points, then the introduction, then the conclusion, and title is last. I'll show you this outline that we looked at before. The next stage on it looks something like this. Again, she was writing about the environment, again, how you can make a difference, and she had written her supporting points and the body points around it, but then she was trying to really bring the speech home with a really captivating introduction and a very strong conclusion. And at the time, Hurricane Sandy had just hit the east coast of the US, and climate change was a topic on everybody's mind. So she decided to work that into the introduction, showing that climate change is real. This is a very real example of it happening very recently, and then introduce the concept of you can make a difference. So it was a very powerful introduction, and one that everybody could easily relate to. Even though she was talking about something huge like Hurricane Sandy, then in her supporting point, she was talking about the small things that each of us can do to make that big difference. And as she wrote the conclusion, she talked about the devastation of climate change, which related back to the introduction and Hurricane Sandy. The takeaway challenge then for everyone was make a difference. Go out there and make a difference. She also repeated the phrase, you can make a difference, all the way through the speech. So it became a through line, or this thread that wove the whole thing together. Okay, so the essential takeaways now are get away from your phone, get away from your computer and dedicate time to your best ideas, your best speech ideas. You'll find that when you write in an uninterrupted way, it becomes a very streamlined process and a great way to do it. Brainstorm the best supporting points for your big speech idea and enjoy that process, kind of relish in it. Take your time with your brainstorming. And like I said, once you've done your brainstorming, if you have the time, put it away and percolate for a couple of days or for a week and just see what else comes up, what else comes out of your brain on that speech idea and those supporting points. Then the last big takeaway is to learn how to write in a simple structure and follow that optimal order that I talked about. So now the last part is challenge yourself to dive in. Now, if you guys would like to do a little bit of Q&A, let me know. I know Harry has a question.
Yeah, I just would like to share with you some information for the way I started preparing my speeches similarly to you. And I'm always following this way because that's the way I can remember it. Otherwise, I'm forgetting some of the support material that I have thought about when I'm doing the presentation. But my question is, are you practicing your speeches before you present them?
Yeah, that's probably the biggest point that I missed, is that when I started to write speeches this way, I found them a lot easier to remember. I think it's because you start to see the logical, simple flow of ideas, and then it's easier to then just speak around those points. When I first started giving speeches, I tried to memorize everything, and it was very frustrating. A, it took a long time to write, and B, it took a very long time to prepare and memorize. So now what I would say is that my preparation is very different. I basically visualize and memorize the structure, and then I speak around those points. It becomes a lot easier to do the prep. Does that answer your question, Nadia, or?
Yes, I just wanted to support for myself because I'm even not trying to memorize anything from my speech. I just would like to write it down and to remember the main points.
So here's an interesting challenge for you. Most of the best speeches I've given are after a long drive. In my car, obviously, I can't be writing anything down. So I'm trying to go through the points in my mind and think about how to effectively, deliver them, but without writing anything down. So it's just it's a completely different way to prepare. It's almost like a table topics preparation, where you don't have much time, you just get up and do it. So Harry's asking, when do you write the speech objective? So the speech objective has to be written first. The speech objective to me is like the audience takeaway. If you don't know what the objective is, or you don't know what the takeaway is, then it's easy to write in all kinds of different directions, and it takes forever to write that way.
I agree 100% with you. Thanks a lot for the clarifications.
Okay, thanks, Nadia. Anybody else have a question? You can send it in the chat. Craig?
What do you do if you're going over your ideas and you have so many big ideas that they can't fit into 5 to 7 minutes? What do you do?
What an excellent question. It's almost a leading question. Really, the art of everything that we do is to try to keep it simple. So if you had 20 great supporting points, or you have all kinds of different great ideas, what I would suggest is anything that doesn't fit the speech idea or takeaway, no matter how brilliant, you have to take out of the speech, but you can write it down in a speech journal, save it for another speech or another time. And as far as the supporting points go, once you have, 5, 6, 7, whatever you come up with, then you have to prioritize and figure out which are your top 3 or top 4. So usually in a 5 to 7 minute speech, which is a pretty big challenge in itself, 3 supporting points covers it. And then the details usually gives you exactly what you're looking for in the body.
So if I understand you correctly, then if I had, say, 9 subpoints, then I could do 3 speeches, all with the same main point.
So think of it this way. This is an interesting opportunity. Like my Vincent van Gogh example, if you're talking about something that's really important to you, then why not write 3 speeches? Why not design your 3 speeches so that you're covering these different aspects that you're hoping to learn about in that topic area? In fact, why not do 10 speeches on Vincent van Gogh? Become a master of that, that information. It's a great way to do it. Anybody else? Did that?
I think, Scott, that the description that you gave for the different type of speeches that are with the same subject is really very good, because even if you are working on one of the pathway levels, you can present 3 speeches for the same subject or the same theme, but different areas. Like you are talking for Van Gogh, the first time you can talk for the style of Van Gogh, you can talk for the life of Van Gogh, you can talk for the exhibitions of Van Gogh, you can talk for many things.
Yeah, so it's an interesting...
And this would be one, like a program.
Yeah, it's an interesting...
Each speech will be a project, but together they will be a program.
Yeah, exactly. If you have this deep interest area, then it's a great idea to spend several speeches on that interest area and build your knowledge at the same time as you're building your speaking skills and your communication skills. I think it's a really cool idea.
And the way I feel it, for me, it's important not to think so detailed for the speech presentation that I'm going to do, but to catch the audience attention in the beginning when I stay at the front of the audience and see how the audience will accept my first thoughts. This will give me a strength in the presentation that I'm going to do, and I will modify, for example, a little bit the conclusion to support everything that I have said.
Yep, sure. Well, there's all kinds of,
depending on the audience.
Yep, there's all kinds of different levels of the learning. And the purpose of this was just to show what a simple outline you could use in order to write a speech in the first place. Once you start getting into the different levels and the different details, there's all kinds of things that we could be talking about there, like a more intermediate speech or an advanced speech. There's all kinds of fascinating things to learn. But again, just straight writing, just mastering this outline is a pretty important thing. All right, anybody else out there have any questions around the basics of speech writing?
Hi. I can only give you compliments on your speech. This has helped me so much. Actually, knowing the structure that Scott has presented here has allowed me to speak without notes. So all the credit to this, so that I know the way that I'm going to speak is that as soon as I know this structure, it's easy for me to do it. I just need to remember the 3 supporting points and the details for them, and then it's easy for me to come up with an introduction and conclusion that's cohesive. So thank you very much for doing this presentation, Scott.
And no problem. Yeah, Soken's like Craig. He likes to do things on the spot and does a pretty spectacular job of doing it that way. So,
Scott, what I usually, do you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
What I usually include in the introduction is a clear purpose and objective of the speech, as well as a roadmap to tell the audience where you're going. And then you do your 3 points. And then I also feel, depending on the length of the speech and depending on how long you make it, there has to be a recap, sort of a summary. If people missed the point or their attention was away, then at least they get in the recap. And then you have a strong conclusion at the end. So I know you have that somewhere in there, but I would, in my class, I teach explicitly the speech purpose, sort of based on like CC3, let's say, and as well as the speech objective. And people are very confused often with the project objectives versus the speech objectives. So really what you want from the audience, not what you want from your lifer. So,
well, actually, Harry, you just reminded me of something pretty important.
But a recap is also important, I feel, that people train themselves to know what they said and are able to summarize it in a couple of words what each point was. And sometimes if it's a longer speech, like a 20 minutes, 30 minutes, you could even recap after every point. So you say, whatever you listen to, this is what the takeaway message is. And then you make it easier for the audience to follow along and to understand where you are.
Yep. Harry, the thing you just reminded me of too is that, as speechwriters, don't feel that you have to go it alone and figure everything out by yourself. It's great to work on speeches with a mentor, or great to work on speeches with someone in the club whose speaking style you admire, and just build some momentum that way. There really is all kinds of different styles of speaking, and if the purpose is to entertain, it's a little bit different than if the purpose is just to inform.
Yeah, that's why I feel it's important to know the purpose of your speech, and sometimes it's a combination. You tell and you encourage or so. But people are very confused, in my classes at least, on what they want to achieve with the speech, and I really train them in that.
One other possible type of speech, which you may have heard of, is just kind of a nonsensical speech. Humorous speaking is obviously different than regular informative speaking, so you can write tall tales speeches that are just basically a storyline around something that may or may not have happened. You can just make it up and embellish and enjoy the creative part of that writing. And all you're doing in those type of speeches is telling a story and trying to entertain. And they're a riot to do. It's a lot of fun.
But Scott, still there, eh? I always make people think, what's the moral of the story? And if I'm a judge and I have two people and one has no moral and the other has some moral, I would judge the one a bit higher who has actually a message for me and not just sort of entertaining. But it's fun. It's fun to listen to these people exaggerate and the tall tales and that sort of thing.
Sure. If you've never done a tall tale speech before, I would strongly recommend that you dive into one. You can find the information at the Toastmasters International website on how to give a tall tale speech. The beautiful thing about writing a speech with a mentor is that they'll help you to see some of those other things with that kind of clarity. So I went back to this speech outline and idea flow sheet. Does anybody have any questions on that? Because this is kind of the essence of the whole thing. Again, as far as the objective goes, or as far as the clarifying of the speech idea goes, it needs to be done in a very creative way and probably not a super obvious way. And I think that, as a mentor, if you're helping someone to write, to creatively tell a personal story around the theme of your speech and then work it into that being the theme is a great way to do it. There's all kinds of different techniques for doing it. But for me, when I see something that's obvious, like this is the objective of my speech, then I think it diminishes the impact of connecting at the beginning or in the conclusion. But again, that's just the fine art of playing around on it. And again, if you're working with other people writing speeches, it's a great way to test those things. Was there anybody else? If you want to ask a question, just unmute your microphone and ask, or just send it in one of the group chat things. No, if I'm going to let me give you one takeaway here. If you're a little bit uncertain as to how to start, I would recommend that you become an expert at doing these. And this is just the basic point form idea flow for writing speeches. And again, you're basically starting the same way. You're trying to clarify your speech idea. You're clarifying your audience takeaway before you write anything. And then just start brainstorming ideas without any details, without any concern for what the introduction or conclusion will be. It's a wonderful way to just start getting idea flows into your head. And like I said, this is the thing that'll help you to remember the speech if you're trying to move away from your notes. You can always get in touch with me through the district if anybody's trying to figure out if they want a little bit more information or would like to invite someone to come and give a speech on this at their club, just talk to your area director and they'll get in touch with me, and I'll get back in touch with you or with the club that you're talking about. Anyway, thank you everyone for taking the time this evening to chat with us and to take a look at this. I think it's a fantastic opportunity to enjoy your speech writing. So I would urge you to dive in, just try it out and see what happens.
Great job, Scott.
Thanks all. Have a good night.
Thank you, Scott. Have a good night.